All right, apologize for that. So we are back. Mr. Pontus, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Matt Pontus, Assistant CEO. Today we've got, and I want to introduce to you Kelly Hubbard, our new Director of the Office of Emergency Management. She's going to be helping deliver our portion of the PowerPoint. Today we've got 3 PowerPoints here before you that will be probably all brief. But the first one, we're starting out with PG&E. Mr. Eric Daniels will be presenting first. We're going to have Rondi Guthrie present on Southern California Edison. And just so you know, we also have some other county staff here in the room. Should you have questions related to the various disciplines, we've got our County Fire Chief, Mart Harward. We have Jan Kogler with Public Health, and Jeanette Pell here with General Services. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started with the PowerPoint and turn it over to Mr. Eric Daniels.
Thank you, Mr. Pontus. Eric Daniels, Chair and members, Eric Daniels with PG&E. Pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for asking us to come and give you this presentation. As you all know, there's a new normal. Weather and fire are upon us, and the company is taking some unprecedented actions to try to help mitigate that potential in the future. We do not want to find ourselves in the position that we have found ourselves in. For the concern of the people who have been affected by it, we humbly are apologetic, and we want to move forward in a way that can be, as best possible, not allow that kind of thing to happen again. In this program that we're going to talk about today, Community Wildfire Safety Program, I'll go through these real quick here, and we're going to talk about them more in depth as we move forward. There's 3 pillars for community wildfire safety. First is going to be our monitoring, weather station monitoring, prediction. Second is going to be our inspections and maintenance. And then the last pillar is going to be the things that are going to happen in the future, which is going to be hardening the system, making it more resilient into the future. All of which get to helping us to avoid having to do a public safety power shutoff. Our intention is not to do public safety power shutoffs. We want to do all we can to avoid them from happening. And we'll talk about how we're going to roll them out if and when we have to, and the reasons why in just a moment. Sorry, I'm not feeling very well, so. First of all, we're going to be PG&E already has a weather monitoring service where we already predict the weather for any storm activity that's coming, especially during the winter time. You'll notice we have more outages during winter because storm activity does affect the grid. So we already have a system of weather stations. We're going to be augmenting those weather stations with about 1,300 new weather stations and about 600 new high-definition cameras. These are going to be along our corridors. They're not just anywhere out in the community. They are along our corridors in the high fire threat district areas. I'll tell you a little more about what these high fire threat areas are. They're based on CAL FIRE and CPUC mappings that we are using. PG&E did not come up with these maps. They are provided to us from the state, and we have to use those maps. So along our infrastructure corridors in those high fire threat areas, we'll be installing more of this type of weather system. And the idea is that weather system will be, these weather monitoring stations will help us predict what kind of weather systems are coming, and we can take actions as a result of that. And we'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes as we get into the deck. One of the first things we're going to do, however, is continue our vegetation management. We're going to do a little enhancement to this. The PUC has already enhanced it on us. Used to be required an 18-inch clearance around the conductors. That has changed in the last year and a half to 4 feet. So this is industry standard now in California, and we're doing a 4-foot clearance around the conductors. The 12-foot that you see here is our goal, and that's not in just everywhere along our service territory. In our service territory, that again is only in the high fire threat areas, the tier 2s and the tier 3 area. A good portion of that is going to be out in the forested areas in the Sierras, where we're working with property owners to try to achieve that 12-foot clearance. In addition, we're working with property owners to try to remove dead and dying trees that are outside of our corridors, so that those trees do not have the potential of falling into the lines from outside of the corridors. We've had good luck with property owners. They understand the potential dangers here, and of course, most property owners don't mind if we will remove dead and dying trees from their property at our cost. So that is moving along nicely. In addition, we've done a wholesale inspection of our corridors within the high fire threat area districts, service areas 2 and 3. We've inspected all of the infrastructures, and we're now making repairs on them. What we've historically always done these kinds of inspections, but we've enhanced them now. We've always had crew members that will climb the center of towers, look from the inside out, take photographs, send them up to our analysis center up in the San Ramon area, determine what needs to be repaired, and then crews are sent out. We've also used helicopters in the past in the more remote areas. A helicopter will fly up next to a tower. A boom will be on the bottom, take photographs of the tower, send those up for analysis as well. We've augmented the system this year and in the go forward with the drones. We'll now have a professional team of drone operators that will go out to the field. They'll go to each tower, fly up the outside of the tower, take photographs again, and then send that up to San Ramon. All of this data will be analyzed together for that particular piece of equipment, and then whatever determination is needed, we're looking for chinks in the coatings, we're looking for fasteners that look like they need to be addressed, any kinds of issues that come to the attention of the inspectors, then we'll authorize the crews to go out and make the repairs. We're currently in that process where all of this inspection has been done. We were under court order to get that done, and now the crews are getting their paperwork. The engineering teams have done the analysis and have identified the repairs that are necessary, if any, and now the crews are going to be marching out into the field. You should see those in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas making those repairs. The intention is to make the system as good as new as possible so that we can, again, try to harden the system in a way. In addition, speaking of hardening of the system, the longer term things we need to do to the system that we will be working towards doing will be making it more resilient. Not just repairing the existing, but let's make it even better. By that, we're going to, in the high fire threat areas where there are wooden poles, we're going to replace them with metal poles. We're going to widen cross arms where it makes sense to do so. We're going to replace wiring, or rather the conduit, with a tree line or insulated wiring where it makes sense to do so as well. These kinds of hardening of the system will make it much more robust, especially in the distribution grid, where the potential for fire risk is even greater. In addition, I'll just add a little comment here about line reclosers. The industry standard has always been to try to reduce the number of outages, or reduce the time of outages as much as possible so that their duration is shorter. So throughout the system, these kinds of pieces of equipment, while not very attractive, are very useful. They help to make the system automatically trying to find a new source of energy. If a foreign object strikes a line, then the line will open and the energy will cease. This system will then try to find a new way to bring energy back, and as it does, it clicks this opener and shuts it, and as it does, it sometimes can create a spark. Now in the winter season, this is a very useful tool of reducing outage duration, but in a high fire season and in the high fire threat areas, it has a potential of also being an ignition source. So we're going to disarm them. We're going to decommission them during the high fire threat season, which of course is longer and longer nowadays. And so what this means for customers is that outages could be longer in duration, because now in order to restore your power, we have to send crews out, inspect the line, make sure that it is clear, and then manually close that line to re-energize. So it will take longer because the automation will have been turned off during the fire season. So I just want you and the constituents to understand that. Now, when we get to a PSPS, Public Safety Power Shutoff, I think is what you really all want to understand how we're going to do this. This is not something PG&E has just created. This is used widely throughout the industry. We've benchmarked with our sister companies in California as well as with utilities throughout the rest of the country. They already implement various forms of PSPS operations. What's new is PG&E has never done it before, and now we're going to. So there are a number of factors that have to be at play before we're going to implement a PSPS. We're going to need to see that there's a red flag warning issued by the National Weather Service, which means it's a very, very, very hot day. We're going to need to see low humidity levels. Well, in this part of the state and in the world, we usually do have low humidity levels with high temperatures. That sort of goes together. It's not like in Florida. We're also going to need to see high concentration of fuel on the ground, which of course is very disconcerting because that is going to be very easily ignited. And then we're going to have people on the ground working along with the weather center that I mentioned earlier to identify what the weather conditions are in an area and the potential for these kinds of activities. Add to that high winds. When we have all of these factors going on at once, then the company can then determine that the conditions surrounding that equipment, the weather conditions surrounding that equipment, could be considered so dangerous that we need to disengage and de-energize that particular piece of equipment in order to ensure public safety. And that's what public safety power shutoff is all about. It's not something that's just going to be done on an immediate whim. We're going to talk about this in a second, about the kind of way we're going to roll that out. But before I do, I want to just give you a little highlight of the tiers that we're talking about, the Tier 2 and the Tier 3, elevated and high fire threat areas. This is the state of California. And you can see down here where we are, in this area here, where we have a lot of the Tier 2 and a little of the Tier 3 that comes around on the southern mountains here, dividing the county. Let's hone it in here a little bit more. So we have Buellton and Solvang and Santa Ynez here, and then this is Santa Maria. Now the grid that comes into this area comes through San Luis Obispo County out of Morro Bay, sorry. It comes down to a substation that's just right about here by the, just north of the county line, you know, where the, just north, on the Napoma Mesa, just north of where the racetrack is. And then then it separates and it comes into Santa Maria, and then also it makes a big triangle this way, out to down to Buellton actually, and then over to Lompoc, and then back up. And then there's the spurs that go to Santa Ynez and Solvang. We're not necessarily in Santa Barbara County. Our grid does not really go into the Tier 3, especially with our transmission lines. We will have some that goes in this way up to the top of the grade to service some of the towers that are on the top there. But for the most part, we're in the Tier 2 or in a Tier 1 area. The reason I mention this is there's been a lot of concern about if we were to impose a PSPS, what kind of outage coverage are we talking about? For the most part, the company has isolated a lot of the circuits between the Tier 1s and Tier 2s, so we can start to hone in very specifically to just affect those circuits that are in the tiers that are of danger areas. So Tier 1s wouldn't be affected as much on a normal kind of an activity here. The caveat to that, and the reason that we have to throw this out is just to be sure that we're not shortchanging the discussion, is if in fact a transmission line that comes from an area north that services this area is impacted by a PSPS, we could then have a very large-scale outage, which would impact everybody even in a Tier 1. But it would be highly remote that would happen, because transmission lines, again, are a lot more robust. They're built higher. They have higher standards and margins built into them to withstand the kinds of weather conditions that we're talking about. But that doesn't mean that kind of event couldn't happen. And that's why we have to say it's a potential. But to be realistic, the most realistic outages that we could see of a PSPS are going to be in the Tiers 2 and the Tier 3 areas, and we're going to be able to isolate them down to the areas that we believe are of most danger to the grid. We're not going to just do this on a whim. That weather center I told you about is predicting the weather into the future. So we know the kind of weather that's coming, and we can predict 48 hours in advance what we believe is going to happen, henceforth 48 hours. If we believe that the conditions are going to be such in a certain area of that grid that we believe that the conditions will be dangerous so that we can't operate it safely, we're going to start to communicate. We're going to communicate with all the first responders, the OEM office, with the communities that are involved, their city councils, you. Our media team is going to stand up and start communicating with the media. There's a whole team that deals with the public service, with the public works departments in the different communities and in the county. They'll be stood up and start working with those particular communities that are being impacted by this particular PSPS, etc. The communication machine will start to operate. We'll also have a team that starts to stand up, depending on the size of what this particular PSPS is going to look like, community resource centers, so that the public has a place to go for information if and when one of these should occur in their area. That's going to start at the 48-hour level. The communication is going to be out there. People will have warning and knowledge of this occurrence. At 24 hours, we'll have a reassessment. That weather center will reassess. Is this still a potential? And then we'll do some more communication. And then again, just before we were to initiate a PSPS, we will communicate to all those entities once again. During an outage, we will continue to communicate. Oh, and I should mention also the team will be communicating directly with customers. We've asked all of customers to update their contact information so that we have cells, landlines, email addresses, any forms of communication they will offer us. We will use all of those to communicate with them about the different outreach that we're going to do on this particular PSPS. And then during the outage as well. And then once we start to restore, we will also do that. Remember, we have to, just like any outage that occurs, down the street, somebody accidentally runs into a power pole and the power goes out, or during a winter storm, a tree comes down and or the wind knocks a power line down. We don't just restore and turn energy back on. We send crews out and they investigate the line, make sure it's clear, and then we restore. So we investigate, restore, investigate, restore, investigate, restore. So that's going to be the cadence for restoration as well. So when you've heard people talk about the potential for an outage to be many days, it's unlikely that that's going to happen unless we had that most extreme example that I talked to you about. And even then, when we start to restore, remember, the grid is not destroyed in this instance. The grid is still standing and safe because all we've done is de-energized it. We'll be able to do the inspection, restore, inspection, restore. If it's a smaller one, like would be much more possible, it's going to be probably to the consumer no more of a discouragement than would happen in a normal kind of an outage that you do receive periodically nowadays. Some hundreds, some couple thousand people, and that would be it. I talked about working to restore already. I'm trying to make it fast for you so we can get to the other guys. Lastly, I want to remind your constituents to go to pgne.com/mywildfirealerts. You can find a lot of this information there, much information about generators, how you hook them up, how to safe operate them. We don't give recommendations on what to use, but we give you the safe operations of them. Also about how and this entire process would work. And also, again, asking you to update your contact information so we have the best information possible to communicate with you. With that, I think I'll save any questions for later and let you get on with the other presenters. Yes?
Eric, are there any questions we want to ask of Eric at this point, PG&E? I have one. So then we can figure out. I just want to know if you've modeled any, with the those conditions that you gave us, high wind, high temperature. Did you go back and model like a couple years at all and see how many days kind of fell into that at all? Do you know if any of that was done?
Chairman, I don't have the specific answers on what we've done, but we have done modeling and we have done investigations of past. How often do these kind of conditions occur? Right. They are rare. Okay. But your county can answer, I think, how many times a National Weather Service warning has been occurred in the county, and
Right.
kind of help give you some information. We've had this dialogue with the OEM team already. In addition, I should add that one of the other things that we're offering is for OEM and the key contacts in local jurisdictions within the emergency responder community, we have developed a portal so that they can see real time as an event is occurring what the polygon looks like of where the outage is going to be. And as we start to hone in from 48 hours down to actual activation, we start to narrow down what we believe the actual outage footprint is going to be. So they'll be able to see that to help with staging of emergency equipment, et cetera, in coordination with our teams as well as we're trying to manage this. So that has been rolled out. They have been granted access to that. Doesn't show them a lot right now because there's no event, but I think they're being trained. Our public safety specialists have been working with them on that as well. So there is also that's going on too.
Okay. Supervisor Williams.
Well, I guess you could put most of my concerns and the concerns I hear from the community into two buckets. One would be what your company's capability is on re-energizing and on how rapidly that re-energizing could take place. And then the other bucket would be what you are doing to make sure you have all vulnerable populations as medical baseline customers and have a plan for those medical baseline customers. So, but before I get into those, I want to appreciate the fact that you are looking at mitigation projects that could at least make us more aware of wildfire, be able to pounce on wildfire faster. But those numbers look like statewide aggregate numbers.
I'm not sure what you mean by what
Meaning
numbers.
the cameras and so your mitigation projects
Yeah.
include wildfire
those are-
detection cameras and weather stations.
Yeah.
And that looked like a statewide number.
Those
right?
are in addition to existing ones we already have,
Right.
and those are PG&E systems. But we also utilize others that are out there. But that would be not statewide. That's PG&E service territory wide.
Got it. And can you tell us what
I'm
It-
sorry,
it-
and Supervisor, only in the high fire threat area. So again, that reduces the universe even more narrow.
right? So you would typically put them in tier 3.
2 and 3, yes.
So can you tell us, because right now we only have 3 fire cameras in the south, and they're all in the South Coast and PG&E territory, and we only have 5 weather stations to our knowledge, all in the North County. Of those numbers that you showed us, how many are you planning for PG&E service territory in Santa Barbara County?
Great question. I do have that information. I don't have it readily available. We are adding some new ones in our service territory here in Santa Barbara County of both of those systems. I'll have to get back to you with the exact numbers, but there are some additional ones that have already been installed.
And are you planning on funding cooling centers here in the North County? I would specifically want to put out Cuyama. I mean, even though only a sliver of that is tier 2, we have had a decent amount of wildfires, and it's adjacent to Ventura County portions that are tier 2, where wildfire could quickly travel. But the temperatures during the fire season in Cuyama and New Cuyama definitely can affect the health. And we have limited facilities where that's possible. So it seems to be a place where some planning would be in order, and even you funding the school district or another entity to be able to just reimburse costs of additional cooling and additional staffing or something like that. This seems like something that we might want to plan for. Are there immediate plans that you have in the service territory on cooling centers?
So we do have the community resource centers that are referenced. They will not be cooling centers in the traditional sense of a cooling center. They most likely will have some air conditioning in them. That's just brought in for the sake of that site. They will be more informational, not necessarily. There would not be considered shelters. Cooling centers are really the responsibility of the local communities, not PG&E. But we would want to work with you if there was to be some sort of a PSPS event. Remember, a PSPS event is only going to be called in the instance where we're already having a heat wave that you probably might have already stood those kinds of resources up on your own prior to our determination that the grid needs to be disengaged. So it would continue to be something that would be the local government's responsibility.
And so the only folks that you're going to take responsibility for is the medical baseline customers. So then tell us, how does one qualify for being a medical baseline customer, and what's the planning involved to make sure that those individuals are safe during?
So PG&E already has a list of the medical baseline community members that have self-identified themselves to us. Remember, we don't know who they are unless they self-identify. Through the process that I referenced in my slides with the asking for information, there's also a way for folks to self-identify if they're medical baseline. We have also worked with the community, with all of the communities in our jurisdiction remember, a lot of this is private information about those particular people, so there's some legalities. We've worked with our legal team to try to identify ways to work with that, so we can coordinate with emergency service personnel in each of the communities and in the counties that have signed up with NDAs and non-disclosure agreements. So the legal team has worked those kind of kinks out, so we can share our baseline information with the baseline information that the county or the local jurisdiction has, so we can better coordinate those things. So that is already underway.
And while we're talking about it, I mean, if you guys have a link, I sure would love to. I mean, because my understanding is, to be a baseline customer, you need to have your doctor fill out you and your doctor need to fill out a form. And so, I feel like part of our job here is to get that out to everybody who might be out there. If you're listening and you might qualify, you should probably print one out. And if you know somebody who might qualify, and you print that out. So can you tell us what kind of conditions qualify? Does someone qualify on the basis of mobility, or just basis of certain diagnoses, or just basis of a doctor's recommendation?
There are a number of items from which they can utilize. I don't want to shortchange by trying to give you that here. The best advice I would give is to ask customers to go to our website and put into the search engine baseline search terms. Get to that page where you can read what the criteria are, and then sign up if you meet the standards.
And can you put that up, that link? I'm sure it was in your presentation.
Well, if you go to the pgne.com homepage, there's going to be a link across the top for wildfire safety. Click that, and then you'll be into the system, and then you can read through and find this kind of information that you might need to pull out of it.
And typically, what we've found is that not everyone complies to messages sent out in a broadcast fashion. How are you making sure that you're gathering all the people who might have the medical need of being a medical baseline customer? I mean, my guess is that you only have a fraction right now registered.
Well, there are incentives for them to self-identify, because there are programs for them. So I cannot give you a percentage as to what the universe is out there and how many are self-identified. But we have made this, this is a long time program, and seeking their involvement in these programs. So, and then I think also the benefit of these kind of forums, and I've done 35 of these forums throughout my territory, and all of my colleagues throughout the service territory have as well, that many or more. So the benefit of these kinds of forums is to do exactly what you've done, is point it out to those particular constituencies to be aware. We've also included information about not just the baseline, but about the community wildfire safety program and the PSPS component to it in our billings. You've all received these at home, all businesses and all residents have. There's been news information about it. We're trying to get the word out as best we can to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to be aware, also in multiple languages. We're doing what we believe we can to ensure that the communication is made prior to having to institute any sort of PSPS.
But just as a sort of, I'm giving you a for instance, right? If you're depending just on your billing and these kind of events, I would argue it might be inadequate, because just an email that we sent out asking what kind of questions should we ask today got a ton of responses from people who never even heard about this before, right? And so,
but they've heard about it now. And it's not just the methods that you just referenced. I referenced also the media. In fact, there they are. So we're getting a lot of attention on this for the public's awareness.
And so you're relying on media coverage and the bills, no other forms of
It's
outreach?
not just in bills. We sent specific notifications as well. Do you have some suggestions on how we can?
Well, I mean,
advance?
I just think that there's other ways to reach folks. I mean, obviously, our OEM has had a lot of contact with some folks in evacuations, so we might be able to provide you areas where you do specific outreach. I would recommend also organizations that specifically work with disabled folks, like the Independent Living Resource Center. I mean, they have clients that are sort of no-brainer to make sure that they're all medical baseline customers. And, you know, I mean, there are other ways to reach people. I don't want to say all those ones that would sound like a commercial, you know, but
Well,
I think a real heavy outreach is in order, just based on our experience, that our notification system is not enough to reach every one of these medical baseline folks or people that would qualify as a medical baseline customer. And then can you just explain, what do you do for a medical baseline customer to make sure that, say they're dependent on a machine that requires power to breathe or to survive? What do you do for that individual?
So go back, your point is well taken about other opportunities to spread the word. We have also worked with other organizations to try to help multiply the communication out. And any that you would reference to me, I'm going to take and look at the replay, and I'll be taking notes and sending them up our chain of command. I do this for all of these meetings so that we do capture those comments and do take some action with respect to that. So if you do have other organizations that you would recommend, we don't have to mention them here, but
Sure.
do share them with me. As far as our outreach to Community Baseline, there will be multiple attempts made to communicate with them. If they already had self-identified, then we already have their contact information. We will make every effort to phone them repeated times, and also send staff out to go rap on their door and see that they have received the information that a PSPS event is coming. It also does take some. I don't think it should be ignored that there's some personal responsibility here. So family members also need to look in on these individuals as well. But we will be making those kinds of personal attempts to speak to those people who have self-identified. And it will not just be once; it'll be multiple attempts to try to get to that particular customer if they've self-identified as a medical baseline.
And if
And that will also be coordinated, with the local emergency responder community throughout a PSPS event.
And if a medical baseline customer does not have a family member that can move them in one of these cases, and especially if you're talking about shutting down, in the worst case scenario, a transmission line, you'd have to have somebody outside the region pick that person up. Do you?
Well, I'm not sure about that. Why would you have to be outside the region? Even if the transmission line is affected and you have wide-scale outage, people are still able to get to that person. Remember, there's no damage, the lines aren't down.
Right. I suppose the question is, where would that disabled person go if the whole region was out of power? But let's go with the more likely scenario.
Yeah, that's not the likely scenario.
Yeah, let's
You're
go with the
correct.
more likely scenario of an isolated. If you have an individual that doesn't have a family member or a resource to evacuate them, Are you planning on paying for a power backup for some of your medical baseline customers, or an individual pickup and evacuation for that individual?
I think we'll take some of those cases as they come, but we're not going to suggest that there's going to be this kind of support for people. They need to have some personal responsibility with respect to that.
And then I guess just on the repowering, this would be all of everything I said would be less of a concern if we knew that you and SCE had sufficient staffing for inspections in our most common scenarios. And the most common scenario, as you probably are already been briefed, is that we will have high winds for several successive evenings in a row. But the winds will go
Not during the day,
down
right, or-
late at night, and they'll be pretty calm till the next afternoon. In that kind of a case, are you going to have sufficient staffing to inspect and then repower so that power could at least be half of the day or a quarter of the day or something, so that people who are depending on this for their life or their livelihood can repower their battery sources?
That's an excellent question, that you would think it through like that, because that's exactly what is the potential to happen. We're going to have if we were in one of these scenarios, you'd have this extremely hot weather, intense winds. We would have to predict that those are going to occur before we would institute the PSPS. So, and then we would be honing it into specific circuitries. If in fact the weather pattern changes and it does improve, then we're going to start to institute restoration. At that 48-hour level, one of the things I didn't mention is, as soon as we've predicted, that's one of the blessings of having this prediction capability, and we do it today with respect to winter storm season. When we predict a large system is coming in that's going to be of concern, we redeploy staff from other parts of the service territory to that area, and we tee them up. So that would occur in this instance as well. So we would have additional staff than what is regularly employed by PG&E in this particular area to address those kinds of impacts that you're referring to.
And is there a kind of a metric that a typical inspector can go?
I don't know that there is.
How long it takes them to inspect, say, a half a mile of line?
I don't think that there would be a metric, because every line is going to be kind of different. So,
Got it. Thank you.
you're welcome. Good questions. Thank you very much.
Supervisor Hartman and then Supervisor Adam.
Thank you. I just have a couple of points I'd like to make, and the first is to thank you, Mr. Daniels. You briefed me and my staff many months ago when this was first coming down the pike, and then you went to the Adult and Aging Network and gave a presentation there that
My colleague did.
Okay,
Yes.
was extremely well received, and that's a really important network to get information out to really vulnerable people in our county. There's really just 2 points I want to make. The first is that this is new for all of us, and conditions are likely to get worse. So I think the worst thing that can happen in an emergency is people get siloed. And so I think today is an effort to figure out how we build a strong partnership going forward. And so I think it's really important that we have a clear understanding of what our responsibilities are. And I would like our County Council, Mr. Gazzoni, to weigh in on that. But I'd like to just mention one other thing, and then I won't talk anymore, because a lot of people want to say things. In terms of the general outreach, we have a Fire Safe Council, a nonprofit here. I'm on the board, and we're working hard with the Bucket Brigade and with our fire department and across the board with fire people, and trying to gather information about homeowner associations throughout our county, mutual water districts, special districts of other kinds, so that we can have a communication network. And the Bucket Brigade has kind of been a leader of that in South County in Montecito area, and we're trying to take that county-wide. So that is something we're seeking more resources to get that in place, but that will be an important communication tool once we have it. So, and then Mr. Gazzoni.
Can I comment on that, please? We can't through every fire safe council because there's so many of them, but we have been trying to work with as many as possible, and I haven't reached out to that particular one myself, although some of our other team members may have. I'm not aware of it. I would like to follow up with you on that, but there's a potential that we can work with some granting support, maybe not this year, but into next year for that.
Mr. Gazzani?
Chair and supervisors, we've discussed before the series of rulemaking decisions and resolutions out of the Public Utilities Commission in this area. Fairly recently, in May of this year, we have a decision 19-05042 from the Public Utilities Commission, which establishes some new guidelines concerning PSPS and also makes clear that earlier guidelines in a resolution from 2018 are still in effect. That's resolution ESRB-8. And in one of the plain English portions of that resolution, the order is that all investor-owned utilities shall take appropriate and feasible steps to provide notice and mitigation to their customers in accordance with reference to another decision, actually from 2012. And in that decision from 2012, which gets essentially bootstrapped into both of these later actions, there's a pretty good narrative discussion that the starting point is a strong presumption that power should remain on for public safety, and that a utility will be allowed an exemption from liability if it acts in a reasonable way, subject to a reasonableness review by the PUC. One of the factors that the PUC may consider is the extent of the utility's actions to mitigate adverse effects on the community. And one example of an appropriate mitigation in that 2012 decision highlighted the potential of alternate sources of power for critical public services such as schools and water utilities. So I think the Public Utilities Commission, at least going back to 2012 and carrying forward, has had some discussions of what amount of mitigation would actually be enough to support reasonableness review that would exempt the utility from liability from some of the consequences of shutting off power. So I think that today in the presentations there'll be some discussion of that, and we have had this discussion with the Emergency Operations Center during a recent tabletop exercise, as well as the CEO's office for quite some time now.
Okay, thank you very much. Supervisor Adam?
Well, I know that I've been called as the contact person for my farming operation number of different times by your staff. And I'm just wondering, how is it that you called me, or what was the criteria for calling customers? Did you call each and every customer, or did you call commercial customers, or?
I'm not sure, Supervisor, who was calling you. It could well be because you are a large industrial user. We do have a team that does communicate with large industrial users, and so there is a team that does communicate with them. I don't know the criteria for which that might have occurred.
Okay. Well, I assume it's because we're agricultural and highly dependent on electricity to provide water.
There's a team that deals with the agricultural community too. I don't know that their charge is to call every last member. I don't know what their outreach actually is, but they do own the relationship with the ag community.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Well, it was. I wouldn't say it was reassuring, but because when you have a highly dependent crop of water, high water user like romaine or something, if the water runs out, it's dead. So obviously in our world, there's a lot of concern about getting this power shut down ever, but especially for extended periods, it's not going to be a good thing. So what else have you done in terms of social media outreach?
Well, that would also be part, when I mentioned the media team, it's all of those sources of media type outreach. They engage in all of those, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or myriad of other types. That team does engage already. PG&E does. It's not something new that we would be doing. It's just something that's augmented to the existing system.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very,
Thank you.
very much, Mr. Daniels. Let's go back to Mr. Pontus.
So Chairman Lavagnino and members of the board, next we're going to have Rondi Guthrie up here, who's going to talk a little bit about a similar program that Southern California Edison has in place.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Lavanino, members of the board. My name is Rondi Guthrie. I'm a government relations manager with Southern California Edison. I also have my colleague Bob Steens, who works closely with our business resiliency group, here to speak with you about our public safety power shutoff. I first wanted to thank you and your County Office of Emergency Management, your department heads, first responders, for being so incredibly engaged and proactive in making sure our communities are not only prepared for a power outage, but any disaster that may come our way. There's obviously a lot of similarities between the presentations and some of the wildfire mitigation strategies we're using, so I'll probably be able to get through my part of the presentation rather quickly, but feel free to stop me if you have any questions. I don't know if our presentation was up. And I can get started while they're getting the slides up. The first slide I like to show is really just related to overall community resiliency and preparedness. While wildfire is top of mind to all of us right now, it is crucial that we all take on the responsibility to make sure we're prepared for any emergency that comes our way. It should be noted that most emergency planners state that we should be ready to be on our own for the first 72 hours of any emergency. And towards the end of this presentation, we have some resources available to help people prepare a plan. Those of us who grew up here in Southern California are used to what used to be called a fire season. We experienced wildfires happening late summer through fall. There would occasionally be a very destructive fire, but for the most part, they were few and far between. Changes to California climate means that the traditional fire season no longer exists. As a result of years of drought, bark beetles, and other issues, hazardous fuels are building up, and we essentially have a year-round fire season. It is estimated there are 10 million acres of land containing ready-to-burn kindling from nearly 147 million dead and dying trees. And 10 of the most destructive fires in California's history have happened since 2015, and 8 of those 10 have occurred in just the past 2 years. Earlier this year, SCE filed a wildfire mitigation plan with the California Public Utilities Commission. This plan is intended to address and greatly reduce fire ignitions caused by utility infrastructure. It is also intended to further fortify the electric system against the increasing threat of extreme conditions driven by climate change. About 25% of SCE's service area is located in high fire risk areas. This plan takes a broad approach that includes enhanced inspections of all of the company's overhead power lines and equipment in high fire risk areas, and it will further harden infrastructure, bolster situational awareness capabilities, enhance operational practices, and harness the power of data and technology. A little more background. One of the first things that Governor Newsom did when he took office was to create a wildfire strike force. In mid-April, the strike force issued a report that set out steps the state must take to reduce the incidence and severity of wildfires. The report focuses on 4 major areas: preventing and responding to catastrophic wildfires by expanding fire prevention activity, making communities more resilient, investing in fire suppression and response, and calling on the federal government to better manage federal forest lands. It also calls for renewing California's commitment to clean energy, allocating responsibilities for wildfire cost, and strengthening utility market regulation. You just saw this in the previous presentation, but this is in early 2018, the California Public Utilities Commission issued these maps that are designed specifically for the purpose of identifying areas where there is an increased risk for utility-associated wildfires. As mentioned, Tier 2 represents an elevated risk, and Tier 3 represents an extreme risk. And you can see that most all of Southern California Edison service territory within Santa Barbara County falls within one of those tiers. Eliminating any side of the fire triangle helps prevent ignitions. The goal of Edison's wildfire mitigation strategy is to minimize the chances our equipment becomes an ignition source. This includes removing the fuel side with our vegetation management program and the heat side through our PSPS protocol, which we'll discuss in more detail. Passed in 2018, Senate Bill 901 required all utilities to prepare and submit a wildfire mitigation plan. Our wildfire mitigation plan activities comprise incremental and new work developed specifically to reduce wildfire risk. The wildfire mitigation plan is broken into two major categories aligned to our long-term strategy: the operational practices you see in the gray at the top, and infrastructure improvements in the green at the bottom. A major aspect of our plan is the installation of insulated wire or covered conductor. We believe it is foundational to reducing the leading cause of ignitions. And you can pass this around if you'd show and tell. We are proactively replacing existing bare conductor with covered conductor in high fire risk areas to reduce ignition risks. To date, our crews have installed 183 circuit miles of covered conductor in our highest risk areas with a goal of 5,500 circuit miles by 2025. We are also supplementing covered conductor with other protective devices that will further reinforce our grid, such as faster acting fuses and reclosers. To date, our crews have installed more than 7,500 faster acting fuses onto our system and updated more than 1,500 protective devices with more sensitive settings that speed the activation of the fuse device to reduce potential ignition energy. As previously mentioned, we are also have completed our enhanced overhead inspections in this area. I know your constituents and especially your permitting staff has felt our presence here very much so. We've completed all the inspections in this area and are on to the remediation work that was identified from those inspections. SCE is also considering undergrounding where appropriate as an additional risk mitigation measure. I know this is something you also probably hear a great deal from your constituents, so I wanted to include it in here. There are some obvious benefits to undergrounding, both aesthetically and reducing a chance of our equipment being an ignition source. There's also a lot of complications and challenges and cost involved with undergrounding, so I just wanted to make you aware of some of those. The thing I like to point out on this slide is it's estimated to cost about $430,000 per mile to install the covered conductor and $3 million a mile to underground. Situational awareness is an integral part of emergency management. We are strategically deploying weather stations to collect high-resolution weather data. This enables more accurate forecasting at the circuit level and increased understanding of current conditions. We currently have approximately 200 weather stations installed with a target of 850 by the end of 2020. We also have a 24/7 situational awareness center, which is co-located with our EOC and watch office. In addition, we have meteorologists and fire scientists on staff with expertise in the electrical system. We have added high-resolution weather capability, which enable us to track weather conditions on a very local, very granular level and alerts our team when conditions reach pre-identified thresholds. We have also added fire monitoring cameras. These are high-definition pan-tilt zoom cameras installed on our towers to monitor wildfire activity. This is a picture of the first camera we installed up at Santiago Peak in Orange County, and you may recall the Holy Fire in this area. Our cameras were instrumental to the Orange County Fire Authority being able to deploy necessary resources to fight this fire. And this is the website that is available to the public to see where these cameras are located. Local fire officials, when this program is fully implemented, will have the ability to control the cameras, and again, will help them to deploy necessary resources. And this is the website, I think you saw before, with all of the weather stations, both SCE and others, throughout our service territory. As you know, trees, shrubs, and other vegetation can cause safety hazards and power outages if they grow near or into power lines. We have increased the frequency of vegetation patrols in the most severe high fire risk areas to identify potential hazards. SCE inspects approximately 900,000 trees annually and trims nearly 700,000 of them per year. SCE has also implemented a 12-feet tree clearance from distribution lines in high fire areas to ensure annual growth will not encroach on compliance distances. I will call up Bob now to go over our PSPS protocol, and we'll be available for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Rodney. My name is Bob Steens. I'm one of Rodney's colleagues in our public affairs group. I manage our business resiliency emergency operations, but for about the last year and a half, I've been pretty much full-time wildfire. Happy to come up here and talk about what we're doing. Our program is very similar to PG&E and San Diego Gas and Electric. It's a program we've had in place at Edison for about 8 years, but up until last year, we'd only done it twice, both in the communities of Idlewild. But as both speakers, as PG&E and Rondi talked about, the increased wildfire threat, it's a program we expect to be doing more often. And as a result of that, over the last year and a half, have built up a very robust plan on both the operational side and the communication side. So I'll talk about that in a second on how we do our notification. Again, and the goal of this, the system hardening and everything else that Rondi talked about, and this public safety power shutoff, is to prevent power lines from becoming an ignition source. Statewide, about 10% of fires start from utility lines, but we want to drive that down as close to zero as we can. It's primarily, our PSPS program primarily impacts those circuits that are in the high fire risk areas, the distribution circuits. But as PG&E mentioned, under extreme circumstances, it could involve our transmission and our sub-transmission lines as well, which would impact customers that are not necessarily in high fire hazard areas. The question we get all the time, and Supervisor Williams asked it is, how many times are we going to be doing this in the future? It depends on the weather. We can't predict how many days it's going to be windy, all the exact conditions. But as I mentioned, we've done it up until we put the new program in place. We'd done it twice, and we did it then last year. We activated our team 3 times, did de-energizations twice. So it's something we expect to see more often until conditions on the ground improve and until we complete our system hardening. The goal of our system hardening, in addition to reducing the chance of the wildfire, one of the benefits of it is it does reduce the chances, the number of occurrences we would have to do our public safety power shutoff. So our decision points, again, very similar to what you heard from PG&E. I would say there's 3 buckets of information. There's all the science stuff that all of our weather stations and advanced weather modeling. One of the things we did last year is we brought in one of the renowned fuel and fire experts in the state. We brought him on to help us at Southern California Edison. So all that's sort of the science and technology bucket. And then real-time observations. So our goal is before we make the decision to de-energize, we have a qualified personnel in the area looking at that line, telling us what's going on. I'm a member of one of our emergency teams that are activated when we do this, and they're either on by sat phone or cell phone or radio, calling into our emergency operations center, reporting what they're seeing. So that's a very, very important piece of information. And the other one is, which is also very important, is we're going to be, during this process, is 72 hours, 48 hours, 24 hours, we're going to be working with the first responders, with emergency managers, because we want to know what else is going on in the community. What else is going on in the area? Is there already a fire going on that we need to know about? Is there an evacuation that's going on that we need to know about? So all those pieces of information are considered by our incident management team and our incident commanders before we make the decision to de-energize. So our timeline again, this is our ideal timeline. It's based on the wind predicting like we predict, or the wind behaving like we predict it will. About 4 to 7 days out, our meteorologists, and we have a team of 5 or 6 meteorologists, they're monitoring the weather conditions, and they can see, oh, in the Santa Barbara area, we're starting to see some indications that we might have to consider doing the public safety power shutoff. We're not doing any communications yet because we're still waiting to get more accurate information, more accurate modeling. But we're sort of our getting ready to get ready stage. At 3 days out, and this is 3 days before the wind conditions will materialize, this is when we begin notifying local governments and first responders and emergency plan operations that we're considering this. We're not notifying the public yet because we want to get a little more detailed information, but we want to give our first responders and emergency partners and public safety partners, which include hospitals and water districts, a little head start and let them know we're looking at that. 2 days out is when we begin our notification system. We start again with our first responders and our public safety partners. We then call our critical care, what we call critical care customers, which are those customers that are on some type of a life-saving device. And this is a program we have in place. If a car hit a pole today and power was going to be out, we call them once with our auto dialer. If it doesn't detect that it was picked up, we then pick up the phone and call them. And if that doesn't work, we send someone to knock on their door. So that's a program that's in place today. The difference, and for a normal outage, the difference here is we're going to start that notification process 48 hours out. And then we call the rest of the customers, the small businesses and the residents. We then begin that same process out about 24 hours out as an update. And we'll continue to update between that sort of that 24 hours out, and when we may shut off the power, we'll continue that update to say it's not shut off yet, but it's still on the list. And then we again notify when we shut off the power. I always get asked, why are you calling to say the power's off? I can tell that. Well, we want you to know we know the power is off, so you're not calling our call center. So we want you to know we're aware of it, and it's because of this public safety power shutoff. And the last notification we do, and then we'll do notifications depending on the length of it, sort of in that between when the power went off and when it's restored. Then we do that same process when we restore. Like PG&E, just because the wind stops blowing doesn't mean we can automatically turn on the power. We have to go out and inspect the line. And Supervisor Williams, we've done a lot of training and are confident we have sufficient resources in place. And then your question on the timing, it sort of depends on the line. Some lines you can get the troubleman or patrolman can get in their truck and drive it pretty quick. Some lines, like in some of our remote areas, actually have to be hiked, flown with a helicopter. So it depends. It can be anywhere from an hour or two to several hours, depending on the location of the line. But once we get the power restored, we again go through that same process, notify our first responders, our emergency partners, our public safety partners, and then notify our customers that we've turned the power back on. Because this time, if we want you to know we've turned the power back on, but if the power is not back on at your house, then you need to call us because it may be a problem with the local system that's serving your house. Like Rondi said, we really want to stress the people need to be prepared for emergencies. Power outages can happen for many reasons: maintenance, and we're doing work on it, emergency repairs, natural disasters, requests from fire agencies. Many times, it depends if there's a fire in the area, the fire department will request us to de-energize a line for the safety of the workers, of the firefighting crews. And then let me go to the last slide here, and then we get to questions. This is a slide of useful information. Like my colleague from PG&E said, one of the most important things we do when we do any of this outreach, when we do all of our community meetings, is encourage people to go into this. For us, it's sce.com/outage alerts and update your outage information. Because if you set up your account 15 years ago with Edison, you had this thing called a landline. You've now gotten rid of that landline, and you've told all your friends and relatives to call you on this number, but you haven't told Edison or other providers. Same with the county's emergency notification system. It's very important that you keep that information up to date. So with that, Rondi and I are available to ask questions, and Supervisor Williams, on one of your issue on what we call critical care customers. It's something we're doing extensive outreach. We're going to be starting in the next probably few weeks to reach out to the counties that we serve to see how can we partner on this. on its, and we're also working through efforts through the California Office of Emergency Services, California Public Utilities Commission, is how can we partner with the, like you said, the independent living centers and other groups that work with the AFN community. So we're going to be, like I said, soon reaching out to the county to figure out how can we collaborate to identify these customers, and can we even share information? Because I'm sure the county has some information that we don't have, and vice versa. So we're, there's obviously some legal and regulatory and privacy challenges around that, but we're working to address that. And as the county council mentioned, there was a decision issued in May. They just, I think last week, opened up the second phase of this rulemaking on the public safety power shutoff. And one of the items they're going to be talking about is how do we put a system in place where utilities can share that critical care information with local governments. Right now, we can share it during an emergency, but we're working through just some legal and regulatory issues on how do we share it in advance of an emergency, so the county can identify those folks and incorporate them into their planning. But we've still got a few issues to work on that. But again, it is one of the issues that's going to be included in the second phase of this rulemaking.
Supervisor Williams.
So I would say one of the first things from the onset that is a critical need is translating your application for medical baseline customers into Spanish and having that available. I just say that's crucial.
I'll make sure that it. I think it is, but we'll verify.
Yeah, we've found the English one, but we haven't found the
Okay.
Spanish one.
We'll
Just
check that.
FYI. Re-energizing. I think that's one of the biggest issues, because all of the catastrophes that we could think of with having power off for multiple days would be obviated if we were running through the typical scenarios of sundowners and can be assured that that by mid-morning or by late morning the next day, that in one of these typical public shutoffs, we could re-energize so that particularly individuals that depend on it for their life, but even people who depended on it for their livelihood, would have some ability to recharge their power sources between between the re-energization of those lines, and the subsequent cutoff that might happen again that next evening. Even having 5 hours of power can make a big difference. So what steps are you doing to or can you assure us that in a typical severe sundowner wind scenario, say it's forecast 3 nights in a row, that you would have the capability to inspect and re-energize between those sundowner events?
So right now, I can't assure you that it's going to happen, but it's something we are currently in the process of reviewing and going back and looking at it and saying, can we do it for, as you said, for half a day? We're currently going through and reviewing our protocols to see if that's something we can implement, and we can get back to you when we finish that analysis.
And then, of course, when you have preparation, things are a little bit less severe. But have you or PG&E had to de-energize without notification? And if so, have you changed procedures that makes that unlikely in the future? Because this could be a lot more of a problem if we have to.
So for the public safety power shutoff, we've done it again under this new protocol that we put in place last year. We've done it twice. Both times we were able to give notice. And one thing and it just reminded me of, what we try and do is on our circuits is to, and the reclosures that Rondi talked about, the equipment we're put on, helps us isolate the size of the outage. So we've de-energized probably about a handful of circuits, maybe 8 to 10 circuits over in last year's outages, but it only impacted 148 customers because we're able to. Our goal is to minimize the size of that outage. But we've been able to give the warning We haven't always made the 48 hours initial notice, but we're, again, going back and looking at all our models, and after each one of these, we do lessons learned. In fact, and then if we do one of these up in Santa Barbara County, we'd be doing a lessons learned with the Office of Emergency Management too.
And on mitigation, do you have any idea of whether, I guess, 3 different mitigations? One would be whether you'd be adding more fire cameras, fire detection cameras, or weather stations in the Santa Barbara portion of your service territory. And then one mitigation you've already done, which is replacement of the high voltage poles above Carpinteria. So that, for local residents, that's at least some measure or some solace. Are you planning on extending that that infrastructure upgrade into the hills farther west at any point soon?
So I'd have to check specifically on the poles. I mean, the covered conductor is a target for all of the Tier 3 fire area. In some cases, we are putting in what we call composite poles, and those are largely in the higher fire risk areas that are harder to get to, because the composite poles don't necessarily mitigate against a fire, but what they do allow us to do is, if a fire burns through there, is to restore service much more quickly. Your question on the cameras, yes, we are looking at additional cameras here. It's a partnership we have with UC San Diego, and I think our folks in UC San Diego have been in contact with Santa Barbara Fire on helping us identify potential locations for those.
And does your model include the most recent Thomas fire in it? Because obviously there's some parts of our hills that don't have anything left to burn. Does that factor into your model and whether you'd have to do a shutoff?
It does. So, in addition to the wind, as my colleague from PG&E mentioned, a lot of it depends on the fuel conditions. So if there's no fuel there to burn, chances are, dramatic or less that we would have to do a PSPS again if there's no fuel on the ground to burn.
And just forgive me because I have a lot of constituent questions that came up. The cell towers will typically function for 24 to 48 hours without electricity on their own backups, as I understand it. Is that, are you reaching out to cell carriers? Is there any kind of planning about whether that, our ability to respond to people's concerns would go down dramatically if everybody's was out of cell coverage after a couple days?
So that's a good question. Yes, we've done a number of workshops with outreach to the communications companies, not just cell communications, but the charters and those type of Time Warner or whoever the companies are now. I've sort of lost track. Cox in this area. Sorry. So we've done a lot of outreach to them. We've done a number of workshops with the cellular communication companies. And we're pretty detailed on giving them information so they know. We've given them precise information to say, this cell tower is on this circuit. So when they get the notification that this cell tower is out, then they can enact their emergency plans.
And does community wildfire protection plan areas also factor into your analysis? These are areas like, for instance, Montecito does vegetation clearance regularly through their CWPP. Does that factor in?
So yeah, again, I think that gets back to the our vegetation program, and then what are the ground conditions? What are the fuel conditions that are on the ground?
And I can guess the response on this one just based on my own experience, but you probably know more about the weather patterns that would trigger this. Someone that has a breathing device, which they use for nighttime sleep, and they asked would the typical power outage occur during the day or night, and I would say probably evening, right? Early night is when you get the big sundowners, and so it would be probably a concern to this constituent that we should flag, right?
Yeah, and it's something we're looking into. As your question about backup generation, it's something we're looking into.
So that's can you tell us anything different about how you're going to, or more detailed on how you're going to handle outreach to make sure you get everybody signed up that should be medical baseline customers, and what procedures you go through to make sure that they face a life-threatening situation because of a power shutoff. And my suggestion to both you guys is bus ads.
Maybe, good point.
No, I mean, I really think that the ability to, you got to reach everybody, right? And I think that's one more additional.
So,
In Spanish as well as in English.
So our outreach to those customers begins with the medical professionals that prescribe these pieces or put them on these pieces of equipment. Also with the providers of those equipment, so that they help us promote that program. But as I mentioned, we're looking at partnering with Cal OES, Public Utilities Commission, on how we do this at a statewide level, and then we're going to be working with all of the counties that we serve to see how on a local level we can help promote people to sign up for, if they're qualified, sign up for what we call critical care or medical baseline, as well as promoting, making sure you've updated your customer contact information, because we see that as it's got to be a partnership. As Rondi mentioned and a colleague from PG&E mentioned, it relies on people self-registering.
And I appreciate one of your colleagues going to Carpinteria and meeting with several governments down in Carpinteria that we also attended. They seem to describe the procedure with the medical baseline customers as kind of like a funnel, where you start notifying all of them and need to create a plan for each one of them, and that you go down it. Do you have a family member or then some service to evacuate, or some other way of doing it, and then you end up with a small universe of people who don't have resources and are in a particularly threatening situation because of prolonged power outages. In those cases, are you going to be offering those folks transport or backup generation?
So we're looking into generation. It's a program we're just starting to look at. As far as transport, it's something we typically do not do. What we've done in the past is, if we find a resident that does need transportation, with information we would share with the the county or the city in which they reside.
And maybe just a little bit more detail on, so that you're not doing or what I heard from PG&E is you're not doing cooling centers, but you're doing community something centers. And what are those for?
So those are, it's a program we don't have in place right now. It's a program we're going to be putting in place later this year, next year. I can't remember if we call it a resiliency center or a resource center, but it's in areas where there is going to be an outage. We're working with local governments, with schools and other nonprofits to identify facilities. And it's where people can come charge their phone. We've actually procured, I think, 6 or so mobile charging vans that we would roll out if there was a public safety, large-scale public safety power shutoff, and that's something we would coordinate with the county on. County would know where the outages are happening. Something we'd coordinate with the county on where do you think these should be deployed. And those are just sort of the temporary, come plug in your phone, get some information, get some water. But then we're working on a longer-term program with these community resiliency centers that would be targeted in areas potentially to be impacted by PSPS. But we got to make sure that they're potentially not going to be impacted, or if they are going to be impacted, they've got backup generation. So it's a complicated process, but it's something we've got a team working on.
Well, this is going to be challenging, and we'll try to do our best to help notify folks and spread the word on the medical baseline, and I guess we'll be passing out a lot of applications.
Well, and as Rondi said, we appreciate the work that we've done with the county so far. I think I got to go back on my notes, but Santa Barbara County a year and a half ago was the first county we met with on this public safety power shutoff, I don't know, year and a half ago or so. The time flies by on this. But again, we appreciate what the partnership we've had with the county in the past, and look forward to building on that partnership.
Thank you.
All right. There cannot be any other questions.
Just one question.
There are. Okay.
Just one
Supervisor
question.
Hart.
How long is it estimated for the infrastructure hardening work in Santa Barbara County to take?
I have to check in Santa Barbara County. Our goal is 2025-ish on the first phase of this.
Long time.
Throughout our, yeah, it is.
Supervisor Adam and then Supervisor Hartman.
Well, I want to call up Chief Hartwig and ask him about how he's doing getting some control burns going. But while he's coming up, I just want to say, a lot of this is our fault. We keep talking about climate change as the total cause of this thing, but I think we should look in the mirror. We don't like control burns. Oh, come on up. We don't like cattle grazing very much, and we don't like fire breaks, and we even don't like grading roads in rural areas in a lot of places. And so, I think we have to take responsibility for having contributed to a lot of this buildup of fuels. So, what are we doing? How many fires are we going to have this year, and how many acres is in the queue?
Thousands. We're going to do two. Two are scheduled. They're all both in the North County, and there'll be thousands of acres. We believe that the appetite statewide is much better now for putting fire on the ground as a way to reduce fuels. One of the easiest and best ways to do that, one of the best partners we have statewide working through CAL FIRE, is the ranges. Or rangers,
range improvement,
essentially range improvement districts, yeah, or areas, and using some farmlands and ranches as partners.
Well, that's a bunch of cattle ranchers.
Yes,
right.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
But in the past, when we look at reducing fuels, there hasn't been much of an appetite, and I would say statewide, really directed by the state fire marshal and CAL FIRE. That has become more of a solution. And so we're working with CAL FIRE, and as you know, we're working with some ranches and ranchers right now in trying to use those, even looking at some areas in the South County to do that.
Well, yeah, and that's the other question is, are we out there recruiting some of this Tier 3 area to get fire underneath it so that it's got a long buffer away from the lines and stuff, and we take down that fuel load that's accumulated over the years. The Thomas Fire, there was a whole bunch of Thomas Fire that hadn't burned for 100 years.
The Tier 3 areas aren't areas that we currently have, but most of those are in the forest, and most of the areas are Tier 2 areas that we have located both in the North County and the South County.
Well, I think we should put some thought into reaching out to the people who own some of that Tier 3, and I think a lot of it, frankly, is probably the forest, and maybe even state lands. And we should be out there actively recruiting, putting fire on the ground underneath or adjacent to those lines. And that way we can save all this stuff, and there won't be the need to shut off this power. I'm telling you, this is a perfectly reasonable self-defense by these companies who are getting sued all up and down the state for these fires, which are unfortunate, and maybe there's some malfeasance of management there. I don't know, but I think that some of these things are our fault as well as a society. Maybe not our fault as a board, but as a society, we kind of decided that we were going to just do this experiment where we prevented a lot of through a lot of environmental rules and just wanted to protect everything all the time. And then we've got CEQA that makes it really difficult to do a lot of things. And so we've created this buildup of fuels, and so we have to go out there and take some actions to prevent this, because Yeah, just speaking as a business, and I can't just move. So, maybe if I could, I'd consider it. But I think there's going to be a lot of people that are operating businesses in the state of California. If this thing goes a few times a year for a couple of years, then this is going to be something that may push somebody to move their business out of state. It's certainly going to cost more money. We sit here and berate these guys because they're the evil corporation and make them pay for everybody's inconveniences and all of the things that we can anticipate that they're going to cause. Different people problems and they are. I mean, it's a fact. But why is that? And it's because we're suing them. We're suing them, and so is everybody else. All the other jurisdictions are suing them, and we've created this buildup of fuels that creates these horrific fires, and you can't put them out. So, I think we need to make sure that we're really trying to get these tier 3 areas as a primary target for fire on the ground in the future, and I hope that you can do some of that.
Thank you.
Supervisor Hartman.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention for Southern California Edison, just commend you on your outreach. I had an opportunity to give some welcoming remarks at your symposium last week, reaching out to nonprofits that are focusing more on resilience, and I thought that was very successful. And I know you've been very generous in sharing your circuit information with our county. It's really critical, as I understand it, to have geographic information like that so that we can target areas and be planning community by community. Our county fire department, I think, has activated twice already, or at least I think I've had 2 notices in my district. Pre-positioning, once we have certain weather conditions coming, we get our fire resources in certain areas so that we're ready to pounce. That helped to make the holiday fire so it didn't turn out like the Painted Cave fire. When you re-energize, is there any way to pre-position your resources to be out there? Maybe you're already doing this, but once we know that there will be a lull in the weather, or it's possible, are people there and ready to go right away?
Yeah, so we go out before, as I mentioned, before we re-energize a line, we patrol it. So one of our troublemen or our patrolmen drive the line, from in the part of the section of the line that we were concerned about in the wind area. Or actually, no, sorry, they patrol the entire line to make sure that there's no tree branches, metallic balloons, squirrels, or whatever else that have gotten into the line, or that there's no damage to the equipment. So before we re-energize a line, we patrol it to make sure there are no issues.
Right, and you've got people out there the minute they can.
Yeah.
The conditions
And
have changed. They're there.
Right, and once the line is patrolled, it's a matter of minutes, if not seconds, before it's re-energized.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Back to Mr. Pontes, right? Oh.
Chair Lavagnino, at this point, Director Hubbard is going to go ahead and take you through a short PSPS PowerPoint that staff has put together.
And then public comment will be following that.
All right. Thank you very much for hanging in here. So first I wanted to thank my OEM team and our partner agencies that have been working on this very diligently. So it's week 2 for me. So I'm reporting on this based on some of the efforts of the staff that have been here and those who've been coordinating, and some of my own personal response that I've had in the past with my previous agencies. So thank you to all of those who've been working on this. So some of our slides do go over some of the things that we've heard from the utilities here. I won't rehash that fully. We'll just point out some important aspects of it that we wanted to highlight for the board. Where we're going to review some of the concepts related to the PSPS protocol, some examples that we've seen, just to give you an idea of what's happened already, introduce some of the critical issues that we feel are important to the county, challenges and consequences that we may see, and then update the board on some recent efforts taken by staff. So related to these protocol basics, we're already aware here of PG&E and SCE. I want to point out that the governmental oversight for them is the California Public Utilities Commission, and as Bob Steins noted, that their phase 2 is coming up, so this is an opportunity where we'll hear some additional input on how these programs are being managed and utilized. Also want to point out on the advanced notification, the priority is for public safety partners. And so it was highlighted a little bit, but those public safety partners include the county and cities, law and fire, but also includes utilities like water, wastewater, communications. And so those other public safety partners are part of that first initial notification. And that per the PUC, the utilities are supposed to, as possible, so when possible, give a 48 to 72 hour notice. So again, there's that caveat of when possible, but there is the direction for 48 to 72 hour notice. Here, I want to just point out, and actually legal counsel did touch on these, so I'll skip over this, but again, legal counsel touched on the rulemaking on phase 1, and then the reasonableness review that was identified previously. I think it was Edison noted the percentages of fires and such, and we look at the California top 20 largest fires, and then the next slide being the most destructive fires. And when you look at those, 9 of those 20 major wildfires were due to damage from electrical facilities. And so each of those 9 were started by different components of electrical infrastructure, and so we wanted to point out that those large fires are very much a consideration and the concern for the electrical and power companies. Oh, and I will note too, on the campfire, it does note as under investigation, that was one that was determined to be due to electrical. Factors influencing, as described by both of our utilities, there are multiple factors. Many of them are very similar. I want to highlight that, again, that not all of these are required to be present for a situation to be determined that this is going to be a PSPS event. So any one of these, a couple of these could be utilized. It's not that all of these have to be present in order for them to identify a PSPS event. And then factors influencing the duration of de-energization. This is where I do want to spend a moment. So duration is based on fire weather conditions, so how long those fire weather conditions might exist, plus the amount of time it takes for the company to physically inspect, and then the amount of time to do repair and re-energize. So as Bob noted, it doesn't take long if there's no damages to re-energize, but the conditions, those fire weather conditions, can last for days. And so those fire weather conditions is really what drives how long and the duration of what these power outages could last. And staff, OEM staff, as county staff, we are looking and recommending to our residents and our constituents that they prepare for 5 to 7 days as a community preparedness goal level for PSPS. And so looking to that, you know, again, we don't know this fire weather conditions, how long they'll last, so we're encouraging that 5 to 7 day window of preparedness. You've seen this map a few times. You've seen how it influences within Santa Barbara County. One of the concerns that we want to note and highlight is the fact that just because you are not in a tier 2 or tier 3 area does not mean that you may not be subject to an outage. So again, going back to those transmission line considerations, a transmission line PSPS event could impact residents who are not in tier 2 or tier 3. Part of that consideration, and let me see if I got my right clicker here, is we are aware of, for instance, for PG&E, there's a transmission line right about up here that is in a high fire tier 3 zone, and that would impact portions of our county, including tier 1, who may be thinking that, hey, I'm out of the zone, I might not get impacted. Not necessarily true. This could even be a transmission line that is outside of our county. Okay, so a couple recent events just to highlight. And there's a lot of details here in the slides, and I'll just highlight a few components of this that I wanted to point out. The North Bay Sierra Nevada Foothills PG&E event in June. What I wanted to point out is just this example that was mentioned about doing in-person visits, live agent calls and in-person visits to medical baseline customers. And then also this concept here, cancellation notification to customers who received advance notice but were not de-energized. So again, emphasizing that you're going to have a population that may get notified and they may not get de-energized, but you do have them in this heightened state of awareness and readiness potentially, or also concerns or fears for what may be the potential impacts to their individual safety. This event duration 21 hours 17 minutes in total. Going to the city of Orange, and I was actually in County of Orange for this event and was part of this notification process. And so one of the things I want to point out is, again, looking at the total number of customers that were initially part of the initial notification, dropping down just a day later to a smaller portion to reduce circuit, and really getting down to very few customers in the end that were actually affected by actual de-energization. Do you want to note from my experience that there was a water special district that was not notified but ended up being within the de-energization area. And so there were some of those nuances that did occur where notification was not quite in alignment with who was necessarily impacted. Total duration 14 hours 41 minutes. Recent multi-county notification event from SCE. What I want to point out here is the length of time that these conditions continue to exist. So this was not the length of time of a power outage, but this was the length of time of those customers being notified of a potential for PSPS. And so 6 days of potential de-energization is a long time to be sitting there identifying, waiting for that potential reaction where you have to initiate your actual response and protective measures for an individual or our communities. So moving into critical issues and challenges for our county. One, we want to highlight that this is not your typical power outage problem. This isn't the same as having a maintenance issue or related to a storm. The utilities are taking a proactive approach to shutting off power, actively deciding to shut off power. And the concept that our real concern comes down to is this possibility of a concurrent disaster. So we have a power shutoff and there's a wildfire at the same time. Again, power shutoff is to avoid the wildfires. It doesn't mean that they don't necessarily stop. We could still have that wildfire and also have the power shutoff. With that, we have concerns with response and notification capabilities and how that power shutoff may impact our ability to respond to any concurrent event that may occur. Critical issues and challenges. We won't know the final power outage area until it's actually happening. And so we get this notification from SCE or PG&E. They're giving us identified areas. A couple examples showed you how they continued to reduce the area, which is great. That's wonderful news. But until that actual de-energization happens, then we really get a real feel for how many people are impacted, especially when you think about in our community, we have a large hospitality community. Knowing how much is coming in and out of our hospitality community, that impact population can really change until we know when that actually occurs. Emergency medical shelter locations are limited potentially, and we're working with our Department of Public Health, who's here and can help answer some questions in regards to that. And per SCE, we'll continue to work forward on looking at additional opportunities for medical health support. But our traditional shelters that we may use for like fire evacuation, these might not be viable without generator power. And so we're doing research into this and looking at what facilities may or may not be good facilities for this type of event. Then when we talk about sheltering, we have to look at, is this an emergency? And American Red Cross will not set up emergency shelters or reception shelters per se for a PSPS event unless it's tied to a larger emergency. And so we would really have to look at how are we going to support these without American Red Cross? Is this local volunteers, staffing? Where do those resources come from? And we're continuing to work on these concepts, but it is something that's been identified to us from American Red Cross that this is not within their traditional shelter programming. This has been brought up a little bit here, but communication services, concerns for them being inoperable, limited, or overwhelmed. Challenges in the public to receive emergency alerts. We've met with some of the communications companies and they have some fairly good confidence in their systems. Some of our concerns then come on the public side. Do they have the capability to receive those alerts? Are their cell phones dying? Do they have power to their landlines, phones, those types of things? I also want to point out, we've talked a little bit about the life-threatening situation for medically dependent, but then we're also worried about foodborne illnesses, consumption of spoiled food, making sure that we're getting out information once these events do happen about how to properly handle your food and any medications, again, that might be in your refrigerator as well, and making sure we're getting that information out to the public. OEM staff is working with public health on this, on a couple of these issues, and also working to make sure we update this on our Aware and Prepare website to ensure we're trying to get as much information up there as possible about some of these considerations. Financial challenges. So, PSPS events may or may not be considered an emergency. And so do these always or necessarily merit an emergency declaration? That's going to take some additional policy discussion and considerations, work with OES and other agencies who have worked on these issues. So there's a concept of whether or not it's declared and how those funding mechanisms of the declaration would integrate or work with those types of events. If PSPS events are completely contained within a city jurisdiction, we are looking to that city to take on that responsibility and manage their population and coordinate that with our support, monitoring and supporting as needed or requested. But we've, I believe Matt met with the city managers, and we've looked to them to take that lead for when it's within their own jurisdiction. And to point out, it's not like oil spills where, you know, the responsible party has some obligation to help fund some of these concepts, and it is very different. And so the obligations related to funding are different, and we're still working through some of those, as is the PUC. But currently there is no funding through the electrical companies to help with these responses and potential impacts. I do want to point out on financial challenges. Part of that, one of the things that we want to talk about and just be aware of is when we get notification of these events, regardless of them happening or not, whether there is an actual de-energization, there's a ramp up of staffing. And that is on the county level and jurisdiction level, our nonprofit partners, our OA partners, where all of our agencies are going to be ramping up our staffing and our resources to potentially prepare for a de-energization event that may or may not occur. And again, that's another cost factor that's going to be there. So, to highlight here, wrap up, the threat of a PSPS event is imminent. It is here. It could happen at any time. I don't know if you noticed on the City of Orange one, that one was in the middle of December and New Year, and so they can happen year-round, as pointed out previously. Staff, I think, in some of the estimates we've heard, is a minimum of 10 years while some of this hardening of infrastructure is occurring. And whether that hardening completely alleviates the need for them, that is to be foreseen, but will help hopefully reduce the need. And it's new. It's a new concept. So this is new for the state. This is new for local, for the utilities. So there's a lot of questions still related to fiscal responsibility, required assistance, how we work on backup generators and power, those types of concepts. And I think I'll leave it there as we continue to work through some of these other questions here. Preparedness coordination, just to highlight some of the work that's already been done by the staff. We have had meetings with PG&E and SCE regarding some of these concepts, although we do want to encourage continued meetings and coordination for that. County planning. The county has been in the process of multiple planning efforts, including a PSPS contingency plan, OEM annex for PSPS response, so how is the Office of Emergency Management going to support? And then each of the county departments looking at their continuity of operation plans and how we're going to continue operations as a county. Care and sheltering planning, we mentioned medical shelters, multiple walkthrough meetings with our OA partners. Presentations and outreach, there's just a few of those. Really working on the outreach side right now on doing some additional materials that the OEM staff can provide, whether that's through Aware and Prepare, some brochures, definitely looking at the Spanish translations, currently working on some brochures and materials, finalizing that language, and those will definitely be translated. And then outreach, also community or town hall meetings that we will work on scheduling in the next month or so. OA coordination with our OA partners, looking again, bilingual handouts, EMC committee meetings, our emergency management committee meetings. We've met with other partners such as the Coast Guard, our Adult Aging Network, County Education Office, and some others. And met with private sector partners just last week, and some additional meetings coming up with some of our private sector partners. So with that, unless Matt has some additional notes.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as you can see, we've had a lot of resources on this, and I just want to give a couple thanks out there to our county department heads that are all engaged and looking at their own internal operations to figure out if we have outages in those areas where we have county facilities and operations, what impacts we might have. So we've been engaged with everybody. There's been a few handful of departments that have really stepped up and really gone through a lot of planning efforts. I know that we have our Public Works representative here, Chris, here today to talk a little bit. If there's any questions on traffic, I know that they've been working a lot on how to minimize traffic impacts throughout the operational area. Fire has been engaged. Our sheriff's team has been engaged on security and what happens when we lose power to some areas, as well as public health, looking at all the different thresholds in trying to maintain a safe and healthy population here. And I think our biggest challenge is understanding what's in each of these circuits and doing as much pre-planning as possible, and then putting that information into our GIS database so that we know when we get notified on these events, we know what's in those circuits, we know who to talk to, and can hit the ground running with that time before it's de-energized. And with that, I'd like to say, another thanks to Terry Nisich from our office, who's been working on trying to get the Already SBC website a little more up to date, a little more current with PSPS, and making sure that everything on there is bilingual. And our Yaneris from our Office of Emergency Management has been helping making sure we get all of that information in Spanish and English. So with that, we'd open it up to any other questions and move to the recommendations.
Supervisor Hartman, and we still have public comment.
Well, I just wanted to ask about the circuits and how much, from my perspective, this is the first of a set of ongoing meetings over 10 years, if not longer. And the first is the people who are on medical equipment, but vulnerable seniors and others who are threatened by heat, people who are disabled. Anyway, this will be a long sequence of both what we can do together as partners and then how we get communities to step up and care for each other. But I wanted to focus on that planning, GIS, understanding circuits and where they are, and whether you have that information or whether you need it, and what we or our partners can do to make sure that it is developed and that you can come back in a short period of time and tell us about.
Thank you for the question, Supervisor Hartman, through the chair. So we do have all of the individualized circuits from the Southern California Edison jurisdiction, and our GIS specialist, Nancy, has been taking those and really working with public health with their information on our medical baseline or our sensitive needs population in those areas. So we have started that process. In PG&E, we have a portal that Mr. Daniels reported on that has some information in it. It's not as specific to the individualized circuits as we have got from PG&E, but it does provide us where the transmission lines are. So we're still working with them to make sure that we get everything we can from them in terms of those individual circuits so that we can do more planning, intense planning efforts in those areas.
May I ask Mr. Daniels, can you get us that information?
My understanding is that the the portal does have the circuits for you, and it does have the number of the circuits, which would be the name of the circuit. So I'm not sure what you need.
So we'll take another look at that
Yeah.
and make sure we've got everything in there and let you know if we are still missing anything.
Okay, thanks.
But we have your commitment. You'll do your very best to get us what we need so
That's
that
correct.
we can. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
I thought you had it.
All right, let's go to public comment. How many speakers do we have?
Chair Levanino, members of the board, we have 6 requests to speak on this item.
Okay. Let's rock and roll.
And we are going to begin in Santa Barbara with Ruth Dubin Steinberg, to be followed by Danny Anderson. Ruth?
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank the Board of Supervisors for this opportunity to express some concern and offer a few recommendations on behalf of a community still recovering from trauma on the issue of PSPS protocol, public safety power shutoff. I am Ruth Steinberg. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and director of Jewish Family Service, serving mostly an elderly population, many frail elderly. But I want to make sure everybody knows our services are open to all, not just Jewish clients. I also participate on the community wellness team through the County Department of Behavioral Wellness, formed after the Thomas Fire and debris flow disasters. We represent a number of mental health agencies and faith-based organizations. The professionals on this team serve a wide demographic from many, many walks of life. So while there are many things that we could discuss, I wanted to limit my points here to just 2 that I wanted to raise, and related to PSPS. And that is, first of all, the crucial need, I think, and we think, for as much notice as possible to allow the community to try to prepare for this possibility. We really think that it takes time to prepare psychologically and emotionally for the likelihood or the possibility of this occurrence. You know, people mention 24 or 48, even 72 hours, but the reality is it takes quite a bit of time to prepare in many, many ways for this kind of understanding. While we certainly understand the necessity of these shutoffs, we also see that this could likely re-traumatize members of the community, and it's vitally important to address this now, and that's before there's a weather event, especially in view of a possibility of 5 or 7 day shutoffs being possible. And of course, the many, many issues arise. You know, we talked about those with medical needs, but really everyone in the community, many, many members of the community that suffered so much trauma in the last disasters, to really give them time. So that leads me to the second point, which is that outreach and access to information is so key, which a number of people did indicate. It's important to get the word out in a variety of ways, taking into account all the members of our community, including the frail, homebound population. So we therefore would urge the utilities to consider simple and direct TV and radio PSAs, for example, to help prepare the community in this way. Again, before there's a necessity for preparing in a hurry or under an emergency condition. September happens to be National Preparedness Month, so we believe to be prepared and not scared would be the order of the day. So I'm just urging you as a mental health professional representing my professional community to really consider this issue as we look forward to this possibility. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
We are going to stay in Santa Barbara with Danny Anderson, and then returning to Santa Maria with Jamie Diggs.
If you just point that way. Here you go. You're welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danny Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the Independent Living Resource Center. I have so much to say in only 3 minutes, so I want to start by saying that I can appreciate the reports talking about the best case scenario, a 21-hour, a 48-hour, whatever it may be. But we also heard to get ready for 5 to 7 days, and there are many people in our area who are not lucky like me. I have a very supportive family that lives 5 miles away. They'll come over, they'll set up a generator. I can have some place to go that's accessible. I'm the minority when it comes to that. When it comes to the community that ILRC serves, we have many low-income individuals with significant disabilities who live alone, can't drive, are dependent on paratransit, and we're very lucky here in Santa Barbara to have Easy Lift, but that's not so in all of our communities. That takes notice. 2 days is not enough notice. A week is what they need. So here I am at home. My power's going to go out. I can't breathe without a CPAP, and I can't get around even my home without a charged up wheelchair. You give me 2 days notice, I can't get a ride. Even if I could, where am I going to go? I can't go to a friend or family's house. I don't have that. Even if I did, I probably couldn't get into their house. There's probably steps to get into it. I probably can't use their restroom. and I'm being told that hospitals are not the place to go. There's not enough room, and there may not be enough centers to accommodate everyone. This is not a matter of personal responsibility. This is more than an inconvenience. This is people's lives that we're talking about. The medical baseline programs are wonderful. They're advertised historically as a way to save money on your bill, so I think that some major education is necessary to get more people to self-identify for the medical baseline program. I'm not even a member of the medical baseline program, so I should probably go and do that. I just want to really encourage the utilities companies to reach out to the Independent Living Resource Center. We serve Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo counties. We're the only cross-disability organization of our type. So please reach out to us and let us help you to better serve the disability community. That goes for the OEMs as well. And I want to say thank you very much to the supervisors, especially Supervisor Williams, for your wonderful comments and questions, and for asking for the community's questions, because I think those were very important to be asked. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we are going to return to Santa Maria with Jamie Diggs, to be followed by Andy Caldwell.
Hello, I'm Jamie Diggs. I'm Partner Services Manager at the Food Bank of Santa Barbara County. Our CEO wasn't able to be present, so here I am. The food bank is thankful that the county is planning for the serious challenges that are being posed today, and we're very pleased to be a part of these discussions with the county. Especially recently, last week we had a meeting with OEM. My superiors were there, and they were discussing the challenges. There are over 350 nonprofit organizations that belong to the food bank in their membership, so they are very concerned about the basic nutrition needs that are even more vulnerable in a disaster context. So we are feeding local residents in this situation. It will present challenges such as food distribution sites will be shut down, schools will likely be closed, and the children that receive 2 meals a day will not be fed. Food spoilage will be a major issue. Normal distribution routes may not be accessible or even effective, and the list of challenges goes on. But we are eager to work with the county to plan and prepare our community for the potential power outages that may be in the foreseeable future. But we're thankful that the county has such a long and strong history of engaging with the food bank and our partners to ensure that local residents have food to eat in the disaster context. And we certainly appreciate you involving the food bank in planning for the potential power shutdowns. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Andy Caldwell, to be followed by Paul Chunette.
Chair Levanino, members of the board, Andy Caldwell representing CoLab. I would title this that California's descent to third world hellhole status continues. What we're talking about here is crisis prevention that could be the biggest crises that we've had in this county in more than 100 years. You may not have a fire, but shutting off the power in case you have a fire can cause more death and mayhem and destruction in our society than the fire. And I don't understand why people aren't addressing this. I completely concur with Supervisor Adam that, there's an issue of a spark from the utility. There's the issue of the fuel that is the function of government policies and priorities. And I don't see anybody doing a mea culpa. The bottom line is these companies are facing bankruptcy, and you contributed to that because you jumped on the bandwagon to sue them. And there's only 3 groups of people that can pay for the cost of any of this. It's the stockholders, well, they're in bankruptcy. It's the ratepayers, and believe me, they are going to get it. And third, it's the taxpayers. And in some cases, the ratepayers and the taxpayers are the same. But the bottom line, the shutdowns can be more catastrophic because it's more widespread, and it's going to be more frequent than the fires. And this issue of 10 million acres of dead trees, 147 million dead or diseased trees, most of those are on state or federal property and or under the protection of county and state policies. You're protecting the fuel, and then you're asking the utilities to clean up the mess, and you're asking your constituents to suffer the consequences. This is California being run by people that have no balance or perspective on reality in terms of the fact that we've allowed these forests to overgrow. We've allowed the fuel to build up to 100 years. That last fire, it wasn't a fire, it was an explosion. And you guys, government at every level, because of CEQA, U.S. forest policies and county policies are responsible for that. You know, we can't get mechanized clearing even after a fire started without special permission. You prohibit agriculture and grazing in certain areas of the county, resource management zones. You need to start raising hell with the PUC, the California state government, and our federal government to change the underlying circumstances. And again, I would ask that they'd pull this program entirely, because it's worse than the fires, because it's spread over a much larger area. And these deaths could happen for nothing. It could be a false alarm, no fire, but people locked in their homes without breathing machines, medicines, food, and God knows what else. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Paul Chinette, to be followed by David Maislew.
Chair Lavagino and members of the board, I am Paul Chunet, and I'm here today as the president of the Cuyama Community Services District Board. I want to be clear that I'm not opposed to any means that protects the loss of life and property due to wildfires. However, I believe that the public safety power shutoff disproportionately affects disadvantaged rural, remote communities, as in New Cuyama. The Cuyama Community Services District does not have the fiscal nor the human resources to deal with the negative impact of a long-term power shutoff. We do not have backup power supply for our wastewater plant, nor our raw water water pumps for our municipal water source. It is estimated that our wastewater plant will be out of commission in about 8 hours, and this may result in a sewage spill in a creek bed, causing major environmental damage. Furthermore, due to the remote location and lack of transportation serving, many New Cuyama residents have no alternative and will be forced to stay in their homes with no sanitary services. I find it troubling that Mr. Daniels with PG&E did not even address the other parts of Santa Barbara County that PG&E services. Our power does not originate from Moss Landing, but from Kern County, and is not provided by High Lines as the Moss Landing power supply comes in from the north, and it is by regular low kVA lines. So in closing, I am asking that the County of Santa Barbara and PG&E work with the Cuyama Community Services District to help negotiate and mitigate the severe consequences of a long-term power loss to the community of New Cuyama. We are appreciative and thankful that the Department of OEM did come out and brief us on the power shutoff. However, we reached out to, the Community Association reached out to PG&E, and we were told that they didn't have the resources to come out and speak with us. Thank you very much.
And our final speaker is David Maislew. Is David here?
One more chance for David. Okay, he may have left. All right, that closes out public comment. All right. You know, I think I speak for the board when I want to thank Mr. Pontes and Director Hubbard I almost promoted you there. You would have never taken the job if you were a doctor, but feel like you've already been there a while. It was a really good presentation, and you really stepped into kind of a hornet's nest, but I feel like we're in capable hands, so we'll appreciate you being there. Any other questions from board members or comments? Supervisor Williams.
Well, I just wanted to raise one issue that I hope you'll follow up with, which is working with the Sheriff's Department about the power shutoffs sometimes are an opportunity for the wrong people, and so I think we do need to do some coordination with the Sheriff's Department, and then just want to thank our whole county family that's working on this, including the new members of the family. OEM, Public Health, CEO's office, Public Works, Sheriff, and Fire for keeping us safe. And I don't know, maybe a suggestion that in the staff recommendation we actually bring this back, because I think there's a lot of issues like how much mitigation infrastructure work the utilities are going to make, that they have that information somewhere, but we'd like to hear it, and then it sounds to me like they're attempting to get to a situation where they could repower in a typical sundowner between evenings, but I think further examination of that would be really warranted, as well as looking internally in our own community whether we're going to have enough of a network of cooling centers, since that sounds like that's going to be left up to our nonprofits or us. So,
Supervisor Hartman.
Oh, I just wanted to echo that. I don't know, 3 or 4 months. I mean, I think this is going to be a phased-in process, and we're, starting with the most urgent first. I also am very grateful to Matt Pontus and all the county departments that are now thinking about this. I know Public Works and roads, just if it's dark and there's no power and there's people reminding people what the rules of the road are. So that's really important. I was holding office hours in Mesa Oaks recently, and 3 of the 15 people who were there have solar and battery, because the battery will enable houses to continue with their power. So I think this is a real opportunity to promote renewable energy, adoption of solar, battery storage, and then microgrids. I'm very glad that the county now is part of Monterey Bay Clean Power, working towards that, and part of the money that they generate will be reinvested into microgrids. And I think over the longer run, we need to be planning where those are most important, where they can do the most good soonest. So those are my comments. Thank you.
All right. Can I get a motion? Do we need Supervisor Williams?
I'll move staff recommendation with the amendment that we bring it back at a later date to get an update on some of the questions raised today.
Second?
Yeah. I before we go to a vote, I also wanted to thank both of our utilities for being here. Really do appreciate it. You've got your hands full with a lot of, I don't know how many you said you were doing, Eric, but 35 or so, but thank you for being here and taking the time. It's something all of our offices are hearing a lot about, and we're going to hear a lot more about them, especially when the first one goes down. So, Mr. Gazzoni, were you looking to weigh in?
Chair, not on the motion, but just I had received questions from individual supervisors and addressed that somewhat in the discussion of Resolution ESRB 8 from 2018, which includes 2 mitigation measures that are really assigned to the investor-owned utilities. One example is the requirement that the IOU, investor-owned utility, can discuss with the local government and the community what the utility can do to lessen negative impacts, and gives the example of a cooling center. And the second, as we've discussed in the slide, is a discussion that the investor-owned utility may provide generators to critical facilities. So just as we're coming back, that'll be part of what we're looking at also.
Okay, very good. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Great. Thank you.